Hello, and welcome to this week's reflections on the study on Revelation. We had last week just concluded with chapter 12, verse 16. So that was where we had this extraordinary scene. The woman had given birth, and the baby was snatched up into heaven. The dragon wants to destroy the woman now, and the dragon's a flood erupts from the dragon's mouth. The Mother Earth comes to the rescue of both the woman and the mother, as a woman and a mother herself, and swallows up the water. So the dragon has tried to devour the child and wants to kill the woman, but he meets his equal in the creature of God, which is the earth. We don't often think of creature, earth, but that's part of God's creation as well. And that creature works to protect God, works as God's protector, rather, for this woman. So the earth also is an instrument by which God keeps the woman safe. So starting then at 17, the dragon has now been defeated. The dragon is frustrated at every turn and feeling the frustration. First, the dragon was driven out from his place in heaven. Then he failed in his attempt to devour the woman's child, and then he wants to destroy the woman herself and her own place of refuge in the wilderness that was prepared by God. He fails again. So this is kind of a 3 strikes, you're out deal here. Well, almost. The dragon's last recourse is to make war against the rest of the woman's offspring, or those of us who obey God's commands and hold to the testimony of Jesus Christ. So to this end, the dragon leaves the desert and is seen standing, as it says in verse 18, on the sand of the seashore. So if the woman's child is Jesus, which that's how we interpret this, who are the rest of the offspring? Those who obey God's commands and hold to the testimony of Jesus. Well, they can only be the Christian communities to which John is writing as we learned at the outset of this letter. So the patient reader who has been asking, what has all of this to do with me, has an answer here. It's not just about this battle between God and the devil, this battle between the beasts and humanity on earth. This actually includes us as believers and as the offspring in this sense. So here, if anywhere, we find ourselves in these confusing middle chapters, if you will, of the book. We're about dead center of the book right now. For the war between the dragon and us will play itself out in the scenes shortly to follow. It now becomes evident that John's visions bring to realization a 2-part interpretation of the ancient prophecy addressed to the serpent in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, where God tells the serpent, I will put enmity between you and the woman, which is now fulfilled in Revelations 12, and second, between your offspring and hers, which will be fulfilled in Revelation 13. The woman's offspring, in the first instance, is Christ, the birth of the baby, chapter 12, verse 5. But the focus of the attention is not on the conflict between the dragon and Christ, which is already past. Christ has already won that conflict. Rather, it's on the conflict between the dragon's offspring, not yet identified, so don't get ahead of me, and the followers of Christ, those who obey God's commandments and hold on to the testimony of Jesus Christ. So that will be the subject of our next chapter. And I'm sorry I cut us short last time, but I just was running out of time. So if you haven't already, feel free to pause this video, read or listen to chapter 13. As I said, I'd like to listen to the dramatized reading because it includes all the background sounds. And here, as much as anywhere, or maybe more than some other places in our scriptures, the background sounds are great. It's like being in the midst of all of it. So this chapter has to do with the two beasts and their deception for humanity, I guess would say. The New International Version of the Bible locates the sentence, the dragon stood on the shore of the sea, actually at the beginning of chapter 13 as of verse 1, rather than at the end of chapter 12, which is how the NRSV, the New Revised Standard Version, has it. This really wasn't the case in either the modern Greek editions or the text of what we're using or what I'm using as quotes in the NRSV. Both of those included that sentence at the end of chapter 12, verse 18. And that verse doesn't exist in the New International Version. But the tendency to place it in chapter 13 seems to have begun with certain later Greek manuscripts that read estathen, or I stood, on the shore of the sea. The effect of reading it that way was to place John on the shores of Patmos with the verb I stood, preliminary to I saw, which is chapter 13, verse 1. I know I'm probably giving you way too much Greek information here, but I'm just trying to help you understand why certain translations divide it up a certain way. The earlier, which honestly are better manuscripts, as well as the modern translations, including the NIV, read estathe, he stood, locating the dragon by the sea and linking him unmistakably with the beast's emergence out of the sea in chapter 13. So the new character in the story is the beast coming out of the sea. So it is appropriate that chapter 13 should begin with him rather than where the dragon was standing. Is that confusing enough for you? But, theologians, much better brand of people in my estimation. Theologians like to discuss these kinds of things, so I just thought I'd share that with you. So John's use of I saw instead of I stood marks a return to the first-person narrative, John's style that had dominated chapters 4 through 10. In chapters 11 and 12, John could say something appeared in the sky or in heaven without specifying that it appeared to him personally. It was kind of that third-person account that it was, it appeared. So in the account of the dragon and the woman, the expression I heard in chapter 12, verse 10, was the only reminder that John himself was still in the picture. Now John abruptly becomes eyewitness to the events that he is describing, specifically verses 1 through 3 of chapter 13. Several points in the scene are worth noticing. First, a family resemblance between the dragon and the beast is evident. And I know that sounds odd to say it that way, but the dragon in chapter 12 had 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on his heads, while the beast from the sea in chapter 13 has 10 horns and 7 heads with 10 crowns on his horns. So the heads and the horns are transposed here in the sentence, and placement of the crowns vary, yet the similarities in the descriptions are very evident. It's like when I was up in Michigan and another pastor and I worked together, his wife always said, we didn't exactly look alike, but we had the same police description. We were the same size and build and height, etc. So there is a similarity here. a family resemblance, even, if you'd like. Second, although it's not stated in so many words that the beast is the dragon's offspring, this is suggested by the setting in which the dragon seems to call the beast to come out of the sea and gives the beast his power, the dragon's power, and his throne, his great authority. So there is this sense of a creature and creator, not aligning with God, but the dragon as the creator of this beast who becomes his creature. So finally, the beast's fatally wounded head that we read about recalls a significant detail in the ancient prophecy from Genesis about the serpent and the woman. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. So clearly the beast from the sea bears the battle scars of the combat prophesied with that ancient text of Genesis. The statement that one of the heads seems to have had a fatal wound could literally be translated as if it was slaughtered to death, reminding us of the description of the lamb when he first appeared in John's vision, where he too was standing as if slaughtered. The New Revised Standard Version uses the same Greek word to translate here. Something more is taken for granted here than the war in heaven and the conflict between the dragon and the woman described in chapter 12. The beast's wounded head suggests a previous encounter between the lamb and the beast, probably centered in Christ's death on the cross. Both the lamb and the beast were slaughtered or slain in that encounter, yet both are alive again, and each in his own way a victor or a conqueror or overcomer. Not saying the beast overcame Christ, yet we do have Christ's death on the cross. Christ's overcoming of death was the resurrection. So both would claim a victory or to be the overcomer. No other figure in the book of Revelation has captured readers' imaginations quite like this beast in chapter 13. Above all, the challenge at the chapter's end is to calculate the number of the beast, for it is man's number, or it is a human number. And you will recall now what I'm talking about, the number 666. That comes in verse 18 at the end of this chapter. And it's drawn a chorus of response from John's time down to the present. And many have forged in the heat of later and now long forgotten controversies, and none are very convincing, to be honest. So the secular public, and often the church as well, tends to view John's description of the beast either as the stuff of which science fiction is made, or as this kind of club to wield against personal and national enemies. Academic biblical scholars, or theologians, if you will, by contrast, are more than willing to leave both the imagery and what it represents back in the distant past, that is, the time of John's writing, on the grounds that John was making a veiled political statement about the Roman Empire in his own time. He was not prophesying for our time in this 21st century Western civilization. To try to draw something from that to now is to interpolate it in our own image, not to read it in the context of when John wrote it. So on this view, the beast is the empire. Its many heads are a series of emperors, and the wounded head is Nero, the first persecutor of Christians, who had died and, according to some versions of popular legend, was expected to return to power with an army of the hated Parthians. One commentator concludes that Rome would have taken serious offense at the implications of this exiled prophet John had the authorities read and grasped the symbolism of this book. Probably never even gave it a thought to read it. So widely held as this interpretation is among scholars, it is not without its own difficulties. For example, did John himself believe the so-called reborn Nero myth? If he did, are Christians today obliged to believe it? If he did not, was he guilty of deceiving his readers by playing on their superstitions and fears? If Nero is the mortally wounded head, how could he have been wounded by Christ, the woman's offspring, in keeping with Genesis chapter 3, verse 15? What could the death of Christ around 33 AD possibly have to do with Nero's death around 68 AD? To a large degree, the interpretation of the beast as Nero is not derived from chapter 13 itself, rather from chapter 17, which we will get to, but let's not try to say, well, it says this later. Let's just take it right now as it comes. So as the vision of chapter 13 unfolds, neither John himself nor someone reading his prophecy for the first time has the benefit of the detailed explanation that is supplied for chapters later in chapter 17, verses 7 to 18. So the latter interprets in explicitly political terms the things that John sees in chapter 17, verses 1 through 6. But it is by no means evident that the explanation there is also meant as a key to the visions of chapter 13. If John wanted to provide a key, or if God wanted to provide a key for chapter 13, he would have done it in chapter 13, not 4 chapters later in the vision. So the principle of reading John's visions, first, in order in which he claimed to have seen them, and second, as if reading them for the first time, should be respected and maintained. We should not jump around just because we have all of the chapters, and if you do it on the computer, you can go really quick. So then the reader is in not such of a hurry to move from the vision to its historical reality, and a door is opened to a rather more universal, less political reading of this text. On such a reading, the question to be asked is not, where will we see this beast again later in the book? The question is to ask, where have we seen this beast before? And the answer to that second question is chapter 11, verse 7, where John was told that when 2 witnesses have finished their testimony, the beast that comes up from the abyss will attack them and overpower them and kill them. The description matches that of the beast in chapter 13. He too comes up, or comes out, in this case, out of the sea. He too attacks, or in other words, makes war against the people of God. He too overpowers or conquers them and kills many of them. The vocabulary is very similar, and there's good reason to conclude that the beast from the abyss, chapter 11, verse 7, and the beast from the sea, chapter 13, verse 1, are one and the same beast. After the passing mention in chapter 11, John now provides the beast with a more formal introduction. The most conspicuous biblical reference, at least as a point for John's beast from the sea, is Daniel's dream of 4 great beasts from the sea. The first like a lion, with eagle's wings, the second like a bear, the third like a leopard, and the fourth different and more terrible than the others, with 10 horns. See Daniel 7, 1 through 7 in the resource section. In John's vision, the order of the first three is reversed: leopard, bear, lion. And Daniel's four beasts have been rolled into one, or to put it another way, Daniel's terrible, unidentified fourth beast seems to have swallowed its three predecessors and to have taken on the distinguishing characteristics of each one. Again, remember, this is paranormal, I guess, in some sense, or supernatural, if you would prefer that term. So to try to reason out how this all happens logically, according to our human reasoning, don't do it. You're just conflicting yourself in times of reading and just being in the story. So the beast's agenda corresponds to that of the dragon. The dragon was the deceiver of the whole world, and the beast throughout chapter 13 carries out that deception. John implies that the healing of the beast's mortal wound is itself a deception, producing amazement over the whole world and leading people on earth to worship both the dragon and the beast. The beast's authority prevails on earth for 42 months, or again, 3.5 years, and by the end of that time, all the inhabitants of the earth will worship it, according to verse 8. The dragon's further goal of persecuting Christians is also evident through rather less conspicuous in the beast's career. The beast is given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies, and he opens it to blaspheme God and to slander his name and his dwelling place and all those who dwell in heaven. So this last phrase here probably refers to the angels, viewed as the heavenly counterparts to Christian believers on earth. The actual persecution of Christians is mentioned explicitly only in verse 7, yet persecution is clearly implied in this prophetic appeal to John's readers in verse 10, which says, if you are to be taken captive, into captive you will go. If you kill with the sword you must be killed. So it's inevitable what is going to happen. So this calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on part of the saints. This does not call for grabbing up a sword and fighting back to the best of your ability to try to make sure this never happens. That's not what John's saying. John's saying, if you're supposed to go into captivity, you're going into captivity. If you're supposed to be killed with the sword, you will be killed by the sword. The appeal is based on Jeremiah chapter 15, verse 2. You can find that in your resources as well. And when they say to you, where shall we go? You shall say to them, thus says the Lord, those destined for pestilence, to pestilence. Those destined for the sword, to the sword. Those destined for famine, to famine. And those destined for captivity, to captivity. The significance of this brief prophetic oracle in verse 10 can scarcely be overestimated. Time and again, from the ill-fated Munster kingdom of the 16th century Anabaptists to David Koresh at Waco, Texas in the 1990s, this book of Revelation has been linked in the public mind to violence, war, and armed rebellion. The book has been blamed for everything from social revolutions in Latin America to nuclear arms race during the Cold War. John's oracle here gives the lie to all such interpretations, whether offered by those who would justify violence or those who would consign revelation to a scrap heap because of the violent world it invokes. The book is most emphatically not a call to arms. Rather, it is a call for patient endurance and faithfulness, especially on the part of the saints in verse 10. Revelation describes what God, the Lamb, and the angels are doing, not the things that humans can be doing while God sits in heaven and watches the war from afar. Okay, you get what I'm saying? This is God's war. It's between the good and the evil in the supernatural places of heaven and hell, if you will. God's not sitting in heaven saying, okay, humans, here's what you need to do. Pick up your swords. Nope, that's not there. So the burning question in the minds of John's readers must have been, if all of these terrible things are going to happen in this world, what should our response be? And the answer of this text and over the book of Revelation is that the response of the Christians must be one of patience, not retaliation. First, because armed resistance will be futile in any case. We can't fight the dragon and the beast. And second, and more importantly, because God and the Lamb have already guaranteed the victory. The Apostle Paul writes in Ephesians 6:12, you can see that in the resources, our struggle is not against blood and flesh, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. So those who overcome do not do so with a sword or any other weapons of mass destruction or violence. Rather, we overcome with the blood of the Lamb and the word of the testimony of Jesus Christ. For the present of this writing, John is saying, until the beast's 42 months or 3.5 years are up, those destined for imprisonment will go to prison. Those destined for death will be killed. The sole responsibility of the Christian is to be faithful and to wait out the storm. God and the Lamb will intervene in due time. John's point is not unlike that of Paul in Romans 12:19 through 21. You can see that in the resources section. Paul writes, Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave room for the wrath of God. For it is written, Vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Instead, if your enemies are hungry, feed them. If they are thirsty, give them something to drink. For by doing this you will heap burning coals on their heads. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. So where John differs from Paul is that Paul still has confidence that the state does not bear the sword in vain, and it is the agent of God who executes wrath on the wrongdoer. That's according to Romans 13:3 and 4. Because of the developments in the Roman Empire since Paul's time, John has lost that confidence in the state. Instead of the state executing God's wrath on wrongdoers, it will now be a case of God executing wrath on the state for doing wrong. This will come in the next 6 chapters, which have given the book of Revelation its reputation as the most violent book in the New Testament. Without question, the reputation is deserved, yet it does not follow that the book fosters violence among its readers. The very opposite is true. The call is to patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of the saints. Again, go back to verse 10. That's a call to peace, a call to leave the judgment of our enemies in the hands of God and of the Lamb. I'm going to stop there because my time is coming up short on my video here. So that takes us through chapter 13, verses 1 through 10. And I hope you're having a great week. If you have not already done so, please take a moment below this video and click on the subscribe button. And also, if you would, click on that thumbs up icon. Supposedly that creates a formula in which more people can see it. Also, I encourage you, if you feel free to share this video with others. Feel free also, leave some comments or questions in the section below this video. If I need to, I'll respond accordingly. I hope you're having a great week. If you happen to be in the Sun City Center area Sunday at 10 a.m., you can join us in person for worship here. If you are not in the area and you still want to join us for worship, we do live stream it on this same YouTube channel. If you can't live stream with us on Sunday morning and you still want to watch it in the week, a recording of that will also appear. I hope you're having a great week. Thanks for joining me again. Take care. God bless.